You are what you eat, you are what you read. And so many of the books that I have on my bookcase now are not technical in nature at all. They're about managing organizational dynamics. It's about political savvy. It's about how to get my ideas stakeholdered and sold. And so you start to think about the CISO has one of the most difficult, complex jobs in the organization.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative and Google Chrome Enterprise is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the #1 best-selling CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as from other top CISOs and cybersecurity thought leaders. Listen to previous CISO Stories episodes at securityweekly.com/CSP. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.
I am your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Sheldon Cuffie, Enterprise CIO at American Family Insurance.
I didn't choose cyber, it chose me. And so kind of sometimes in life you have you trip upon something that is insanely interesting, compelling, complex, and it just really draws you into it. And so I found that over time, working in infrastructure teams over the past 25 plus years, there was always this component about protection and safety and security. And, back 90s, even the early 2000s, you didn't have dedicated cybersecurity teams. And so I was always that person that was curious about, okay, how can we automate the virus signatures? How can we get desktop firewalls in place? I'm dating myself a little bit, but and so that just kind of developed into a career at some point here. But I also realized when I was in the Army, I was a computer tech, signal corps, and I realized I had been learning about cyber since I was 19 years old. So it's kind of an interesting. It's interesting how that works out.
It's interesting. My father was in the Army Signal Corps also, and growing up, I never knew what that meant, And so, who knows? Maybe he was planting seeds of cybersecurity someday.
Yeah, and if you think about Army Signal, very much you're learning how to encrypt communications because you don't want the enemy to intercept your comms, or you're thinking about how to get communication from one side of a forest to the other, or in the more modern days, how do we encrypt these signals around the world and orchestrate operations within theaters. And so you really start to think about, that's what we were talking about back then. We were also talking about how do you counter jam, how do you jam electronics and then counter jamming and that kind of thing. And you fast forward to today, much of what was Army Signal is, I was at Fort Gordon, that is U.S. Army Cyber Command. And so you start to connect the dots of, oh, I've been learning about this since I was a kid, basically. So it's kind of fascinating.
Interesting. When you talk about jamming, it reminds me of a hotel that I was part of a conference planning committee, and there was one hotel that was offering Wi-Fi to us, but they wanted to charge us for the Wi-Fi. And so we found out that they were actually jamming the signal in the conference rooms unless you paid for the Wi-Fi. And they've since eliminated that practice as people started finding out about that. But I thought that was rather interesting. So today we're going to talk about the evolution and portability of the CISO role. So you've had several different roles Tell us about that. What do you mean by the portability of the CISO role?
Yeah, so I've been a CISO 3 times now, and in almost every role, I've found that most people don't really know what a CISO is unless I educate them or try to connect the dots with either metaphors, analogies, stories, whatever. And when you look at, and I think there's been some really good work in the industry, the CISO mind map, you start to look at all of the things that make up cybersecurity, inclusive of information risk, business continuity. You need to know a lot about financial issues, how to protect revenue. You need to understand legal issues, compliance, state laws, federal laws, international. So I really found myself what I thought cyber was and what it is are two very different things. And coming in on the information risk management side, which is more policy, governance, risk, and compliance, I'm actually thankful for that. I got to start with understanding that all cyber programs are risk programs. And if you think about it that way, every company is in the business of managing risk at the board level. And so now these interactions between enterprise risk management, information and technology risk management, and how that correlates into actual protections, like that really is the full spectrum of how we need to think about these programs. So that translates into what CISOs need to be feeding themselves. You are what you eat, you are what you read. And so many of the books that I have on my bookcase now are not technical in nature at all. They're about managing organizational dynamics. It's about political savvy. It's about how to get my ideas stakeholdered and sold. And so you start to think about the CISO has one of the most difficult, complex jobs in the organization. I'm sure if you asked any other C-suite leader, they would say, well, my job is just as difficult and complex as well, right? Absolutely would not dispute that. I would just say that the CISO correlated with cyber risk that is evolving and growing is always in a constant adaptable state to be able to respond and address those threats and then mitigate them to an appropriate risk level. I don't. A lot of leaders are not dealing with that level of change hour to hour, day by day.
It's interesting you say that about the bookshelf. If you look at the bookshelf behind me, one of them is our security-related books, and the other shelf is all leadership books, personality books, things like that. And when I was putting the CISO Compass book together, I had come up with a model, the CISO Evolution, and devoted a whole chapter to it because I thought it was so important to show that we moved through these 5 various stages, and now I've added a 6th stage. But the 5 stages of first we start off with the technical CISO, and then we moved into compliance-oriented CISO, and then we moved to the risk level, and then we moved to the threat and mobility socially conscious CISO, and then we've moved into a privacy-aware CISO. That's a quick view of the 5 phases, and then now we're in this business resiliency, supply chain oriented CISO. And the thing that I think is fascinating about that is none of these things go away. It just adds to the sandbox of those things that the CISO has to know.
Yeah, when you sent me your book a few years ago, and I remember, and like every book, you just start paging through it, and you want to check your interest level. And I really got pulled into it because I thought, wow, this is, you think about the evolution of these roles. And I remember thinking, wow, this is a book I needed 6 or 7 years ago because it really speaks to the continuum and the spectrum of how you need to evolve as a CISO, and you could say that's portable to other roles. I'm sure it is, but the CISO role I think is unique because as you talk through all of those different archetypes, they're engaging in slightly different ways. So yes, I've been learning. I say learning because in IT you're always learning. Over 30 years, I've been learning the shifts and changes within technology. You have to, or otherwise you're falling behind. I've probably only really been working on my people dynamics and my interpersonal skills and my emotional intelligence for the past 15. And so every new leadership team I encounter, every new stakeholder is different every time. People are not math equations. And so there is no predictable outcome or predictable answer or, hey, Sheldon didn't have his coffee this morning. That's why he's a little cranky, right? Those are things that we're not always going to pick up on. And I think that just ties so well with what your book was articulating is some of these soft skill things. And we call them soft, but these are tangible skills that if you don't have, it is a detriment to your ability to navigate as a CISO.
What have you found to be those soft skills that you say, gee, these are really the critical things that are going to make or break me?
So I'll disclose. So I'm an INTJ. So in my natural state, I'm more introverted, and the J means I'm a little more judgmental. So, but sometimes, well, at least we'll go back 15 years, maybe not listening as intently as I needed to, and maybe responding even before the other person is answering. So I'll express a little vulnerability there. I'm sure some other folks listening to this will be able to relate. And if they don't relate, maybe they're not being truthful, right? So there's the listening skills, there's the negotiation skills, and that in particular, I would say, if you said, "Hey, Sheldon, are you a good negotiator?" Absolutely. I can go to the car dealership and I'm going to get the absolute best deal on that car that I possibly can, and then I'll even validate it after the fact. Except that is a situation where it's more of a win-lose, and I want to win and I want the car dealer to lose. Versus in corporate environments, we really need to be thinking about a win-win relationship, and the definition of compromise is, well, both parties didn't quite get what they wanted, but they got most of what they wanted. And so being able to adjust and calibrate just a little bit to say, the other party on the other side of the table, I care about them. I understand their interests, and I want to incorporate those things into my solution or our solution. And they don't have to lose. I don't have to lose. That's a win-win for everybody.
I think that's a really good perspective because we're all coming from different places. I know in the book, I think I detailed out, I think it was 12 different ways to do active listening. So that's in there. And I knew that you're an INTJ because I didn't figure out the whole INTJ, but this is the power of those sorts of things, like the Myers-Briggs, is that the NT that you have, where you said something earlier on that you liked the challenge, and it was that mastery of a skill that drives you, and that doesn't drive every type. And so it's really important that, and that's fine. It's different, but it's important that we understand what drives us, and that we also take the time to understand what drives the leaders that we're communicating with every day.
Absolutely. I had a great boss who probably contributed to a good majority of my leadership incubation and start down that track. And he asked me to map out all of the jobs I had previously and then map them into what's called the STARS framework from the First 90 Days book. And for folks that are listening, First 90 Days book, most people are familiar with it. If you're not, it's right, one on your shelf too, right? And so no matter what job you take, internal, maybe you're just moving to another role internally, you want to go back to that book and just refresh yourself and determine, am I working on a startup, a turnaround? Am I just sustaining success and, don't break the thing? Or am I actually working on a realignment? And what I found was 10 of the past 12 jobs at that time had all been startups, turnarounds, and realignments. And so there was this question of, oh, interesting. I like to start things. I like to jump into the mud and fix things. But am I okay with finishing things when they're more in a steady state, or do I get bored and I'm out looking for that next new shiny light? So, so it turns out I can finish things. I can sustain success, but I'm more interested in, to your point, that NT is really pushing me out into places that maybe I shouldn't go sometimes, but I'm insanely interested about, okay, why is this so complex, and what can I apply to this to actually, turn the tide on that and spin it in a different direction.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. So you've had some great roles. At Dell, you were the CISO at Northwestern Mutual, the CISO at American Family Insurance, and now you've taken on the role of CIO. So what's that look like, and what attracted you to move from the CISO role into the enterprise CIO role?
Yeah. So as a CIO, so I still have the cyber team is still within my group, and I get to really bring into the fold of that and integrate better many of our infrastructure components, our digital workplace, and then also synchronize better with our business partners on how can we be better partners to support the delivery of innovative solutions for our field, for our partners, for our customers. And so before I got into cybersecurity, I was an enterprise architect in 3 companies. So I worked in architecture at Abbott, at Harley, and Northwestern Mutual. And so that really feeds my NT and that creative side of things in terms of, how can we innovate? How can we transform things? And then how can we connect in at the source of what our customers need, expect, and want? And so this allows me to kind of bring both of these things together and, get back to a little bit of the how do we go to market, but how do we go to market safely and securely? And so I think I've either worked on one or the other side over the years, and so this allows me to really feed both of those passions of mine.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to somebody that's thinking about that CIO role? How do they start to make that that move, or have the organization be aware that's something that you're capable of doing or that you want to do?
Yeah, I do have a belief that most CISOs are pretty decent CIOs. That might be controversial to some folks that might listen to this, especially if you're a CIO and you're like, well, hey, wait a minute, that's this and this is that. And I have found the CIO to be incredibly harder than at least my last CISO role, because now I'm worrying about service desks and I'm worrying about agent productivity and just things that they're basic blocking and tackling, but when they don't work, everybody's not working. It's been a bit of a mindset shift for me over the past 6 to 9 months. But what I what I think about in terms of CISOs and portability to roles, not just the CIO role, because in some cases the CIO is a peer to the CISO. So that's more of an interest, if you will. If you want to do that, great, and you have the skills for that. I've actually seen some CIOs go into the CISO roles. But I think CISOs, they can be CIOs, they can also be COOs. And I think that is actually a more natural career progression for some folks to be able to work at the next level of the company if they're not already there as a CISO, and really start to think more broadly about financial risks, operational risks, people risks, integration of capabilities across companies, business models, operating models. That's all stuff that you see where CISOs seem to have some, at least the really good ones that I've met and that I respect and that I've learned from. They have a lot of those skills.
Very, very interesting. I think that the career paths are open. So what do you think if we move forward like 10, 15 years from now? There's been talk of some people saying that the CIO would be reporting to the CISO, or will the CISO still be within the CIO organization? And that we've been having that debate around reporting for years. But given where we are now, where do you see that trending 15 years out from now?
Well, 15 years from now, I would say. So usually I don't like to engage in this particular debate because there's a lot of I do have a direct thought on this, but I'll stick with the 15 years here. The CISO role continues to elevate within organizations in response to numerous threats, which are not always external. Sometimes they're internal. And so you have a multi-faceted threat domain that the CISO has to navigate across technical, legal, regulatory boundaries, et cetera. So it feels like an obvious answer that role will continue to elevate in terms of scope and responsibility. And we are seeing more trends. For example, I've reported to the general counsel of the company twice, not my current company, but the last two. And so that's where you see where the CISOs really need to be plugged in different ways. But I'll caveat that with, and this is, I think some folks will see this as a bit of a, hey, take a position and, defend it. And I'm saying, well, it depends. Every organization is different, just like people are different. And so depending on the culture of the organization, we need the CISO reporting into the person that will provide the most support and willingness to understand the space and willingness to support the CISO in taking proactive actions to protect the company versus CISOs that might be in a role where, maybe people don't understand what they do, and when things go wrong, it's the CISO's fault as opposed to, it's an external, it's an evolving risk landscape, internal and external. So, that's a good long it depends answer.
Yeah, no, I think it's very fair. It would be hard to project where we are today. With we had some ideas back then. I go back. I actually wrote the first CISO book called CISO Essential Principles for Success back in 2008. That was published by ISC Squared. Yep. And when I was writing this last book, it was like, well, I'll just revise that. And it was actually a total rewrite. And the book is twice the size of the earlier
Those books are dramatically different.
It's totally different. And so the space has changed so much. Well, this has been great, Sheldon. I really appreciate you taking the time and appreciate the time that you're spending on the executive committee with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, where we bring CISOs together to work on these issues. And you've always been very supportive with your team working on different things. I know the vendor risk management deliverables that we created, came a lot of input from your team as well. So what final, advice would you like to give to emerging CISOs, current CISOs, new CISOs, experienced CISOs, as they're going down this path?
Yeah, as I've worked, this is my 7th company in 30 years now. And what I've learned over 7 companies plus the military, you bring your technical acumen and your discipline and your knowledge and experience, but every company is different. And so what I try to do is really understand, how do I integrate the technical and risk elements of cybersecurity and risk management into the fabric of the company and the culture, and really understand. And so in some cases, I've had to learn about wealth management operations. In other instances, I had to learn about validated systems in a pharmaceutical environment. I didn't go to school or have any intentions to learn about wealth management or pharmaceutical applications, but those are absolute requirements for me to be able to do my job effectively. And so I would say with the last 3 transitions, I've had the thought where, it's cyber, it's the same everywhere. It's not. The risks are different, the regulators are different, the controls are different, and then you throw in transformations and integrations, right? Things get really hard fast. So I think just to punchline that, it's important for senior cybersecurity leaders to not take for granted that cyber really well, but you don't know the company context really well if you're coming in new to a new culture.
I think that's excellent advice. Thanks a lot. I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for taking the time today to talk with us.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Are you constantly thinking about how to keep your enterprise as secure as possible? Get to know Chrome Enterprise, the browser that will secure your organization without the added expense and complexity of additional browsers. Its simplified management features will free up your team to focus on critical security tasks that can be overlooked because of time and attention it takes to manage other solutions. Don't settle for a browser that compromises your organization. Visit securityweekly.com/Chrome now to start protecting your organization like never before.